Alright, so welcome to this week's CERC HQ. Apologies for being a little bit later in the day. I was sick earlier, but I decided just to salvage it and come on nonetheless. So, pretty much what I'm going to be documenting rather than showing is this week's progress in terms of the helicopter AI, the pandemic progress, the open world, I guess you can say, Bay Area map, and at the same time, just some minor edits and things that we've been doing behind the scenes going into next week. So, right off the rip, I'm going to jump right into the helicopter AI. So, let me share my screen. And then we're going to load straight in. F11, make it full screen. Yeah, you're going to need to fuck off. So, here, let me put Chelsey off in the neither. So, let me go ahead and tell her not to spawn. So we're just going to put her off. Let's say over there. Copy that. Spawn that in there. Save the map. Play. Okay, now we get peace and quiet. Probably not. Okay, so hold on. Let me move that crazily over there so she goes away. There we go. Okay, so now we get peace and quiet. So the idea is that you figure we've been adding in the little birds. We got in their landing state over the course of the last couple of days. And we were working on their flight avoidance and how they work, I guess you can say, with infantry. So if I select these guys right here and I tell them to move, they'll basically form up and the helicopters will try and make a protective net around the infantry. They'll use a dynamic system that essentially tries to throttle them down. This will apply to ground vehicles in the future. As one of the major points of contention that we got in the past was that people would just kind of take off to Narya, and then at that point you were just kind of screwed. You know what, Chelsey? I'm done with you. Fall. So you figure one of the things was basically getting that situated and trying to spend quite a bit of time getting that dynamic throttling in the formation system that would benefit long term for when it came to the vehicles, because we want to make sure that we're addressing that long term of building in that foundation. There's still some quirks that we have to work out with the formation system in terms of basically them going through each other and some of the helicopter movement. Now, and this would also go into play for when they're actually doing, like when they have weapons, when you have people on the skids, then they'll be able to more accurately defend, and they'll do some micro adjustment here and there to defend people per se as you're moving and whatnot. So like say for instance, if I tell everyone to stop and then I tell everyone to get into that little board, you can see the icons aren't in yet, but they'll be coming in going into Monday. But then I can tell them to take off with that. Now the animations aren't in, so they're just going to be standing in place. They do shoot, but we're waiting for some last minute stuff from Michael and Derek to get together to get that situated. But the garrison system is in as a whole. The fast roping is not in, so just keep in mind that's something else that we're working on right now. But the idea would be is that, like, you know, by filling these in, then basically it would essentially like get all of those situated for in terms of movement. So this is a general gist of how it works. There's still some finessing that's going to need to occur because there's still some weird oddities that they do when they're doing their movement code. We need to iron out some of the overshooting. Like for example, this one will decide to overshoot and destinate a point here or here, which is weird. So we're just kind of going through and fixing those quirks of small little oddities. Quite a bit of time was put into their flight module as well. Like that's weird. They shouldn't be doing that. So it's little stuff like that that we have to iron out and improve from their movement code. And then it's also like if I click here and press X, he'll land. So that's working. And then I can tell everyone to get out. And then I can tell it to take off. So we went ahead and got all that working. This all works in multiplayer as well. We were hoping to get everything to a point where we could release it publicly tonight, or last night technically, but that did not work out based off of the amount of bugs and things we need to hunt down and resolve going into early next week. So at this point, I would estimate at least another. I had a meeting with Derek last night. we were saying probably at least 2 to 3 more days just to make sure that everything's ironed out, the kinks are working, and everything's like visually working, everything's good to go. Because one of the big design goals this time around was proper deceleration, where the idea would be is that a lot of little birds or some of the faster units, when you gave them a move order like this, would overshoot their destination and then spend time course correcting, where they would do like a swoop or they would do like a loop or some kind of weird translation, and it just made it look ghetto and very poorly like put together. So considerable amount of time was put into basically just setting this up, so then that way it would you know work in terms of like they understand how much deceleration they need to apply to reach their end goal gracefully was one of the big things. So again, like the same thing that applies here, the same thing will apply to the vehicles, where we're taking things that we've kind of improved or tweaked here, and they'll be applied to the vehicles in terms of their approach. And we're still making adjustments and improvements as we go, because you can see they're still also missing their base formations. That there's 2 formations that we'll be implementing into the little birds will be this right here, and then the 2x2 column. So we're planning on these 2 formations to support for the helicopters. And then whenever there's a joint infantry movement, they'd basically fall back on something like this. So then you'd have the little birds providing security, or the Blackhawks, or the VTOLs, or the Chinooks providing security, like somewhat over the rest of the armada. And then you'd have the vehicles forming like the inner, and then you'd have the infantry taking up slots outside of it. So that's the direction we're moving into when it comes to the airborne vehicles, to the ground vehicles, and to the infantry. So the idea is that vehicles would support these 2 formations when we get to them. And then whenever they move together as a joint effort, they would all regulate with the same general approach that we've implemented here. Where again, it's throttling to like the slowest unit. And again, if I were to land these, which I'll land them again for the people that are coming in late when we move on to the next section, and then tell them to get out, and then tell them to all basically move together, then basically I can issue a move order like this, and they'll dynamically move. And that one did not get out for some reason, so that's a bug we have to hunt down going into Monday. Again, like people that are coming in late, the animations aren't set up yet. They have to set up the animation, set up the actual garrison system for that synergy going into Monday, Tuesday. But you can at least see in the play the dynamic adjustment that's going on, where like they're trying to stay somewhat in a protective bubble around the infantry. So yeah, that's basically the progress there. The next thing I'll do is I'm going to take these little birds and put them in a more populated map. So we'll go over to the RTS co-op test map, which would be you. I don't need to save that map. And then we're going to paste them in. We're going to hide you, paste those in there, F. One of the other issues that we've been, oh wait, there's already a couple in here. Sorry about that. So I can just use those. So this is a more, I guess you could say, densely populated map, so we can get a better idea of showing off their object avoidance. Where the idea is that they more accurately do like pathfinding around objects in relation to like the legacy stuff. Where what we did in legacy was a series of like really complicated traces, and there was no navigation mesh they were actually operating on. So they would get the cruise height, and then they would basically do the best they could to basically like stay out of the avoidance of stuff. There's still definitely some issues here and there with the pathfinding that we have to work out, but it's slowly but surely getting there to a point where we're happy with it. So if like there were a lot of issues that we gave out to some testers on Discord that wanted to just give it a good fair shake, and they broke them almost immediately. So we're working through those issues right now. Most of them in Vix, and we'll be trying to put out like a test version of the helicopters in the next couple of days, so we can try and get more feedback and see what else we need to fix. So like let's see if I can get it to break. So like this was a good example where like they would go up and then they would freak out over these buildings, and they would not understand it'd be faster to basically just go around the buildings over gaming the elevation, because you lost that time in basically going around. But then they need to also still support of going up to that acceleration. or that Z height. So if I click one and then tell them to move, yeah, they're gonna die over there. But it is what it is. They'll understand they need to gain the height, the altitude, and then generally just do their thing. So like if I click say over here, they'll stay at that altitude, that cruise height, and not drop down to the deck like they would do, or do some weird kind of like course correction constantly. Um, there definitely needs to be some more adjustment going to like how they're like they need to space out more. Although you can see there's even some like micro bobbing that's occurring because they all have collision to each other. That's a desync or a jitter that you're seeing there of it trying to course correct and trying to get them away from each other. So here, let me just take that loss. And then I'll show a couple more practical examples, and then we'll see if Dervar or Krieg want to add anything to it before we move on to the next area, which is the pandemic progress and talking about the pandemic maps. So I don't know, Dervar and Krieg, if you guys want to throw anything into the ring before we move on to the next topic. I don't think they're alive. I mean, what are your guys'?
I was seeing how long it
Oh
would
yeah, I
take you
saw
to
you join the
notice.
room, and I was like, okay, let me just put him up. So like, what do you guys think of the progress that we've had in terms of like, from, I don't know, from the outside looking in?
Well, ultimately, from where the base helicopters were to where seeing the progress of where they are now compared to where they were, it realistically is night and day. Because when you see the base helicopters, they used to get stuck on buildings, they used to bump into things, they used to, really misbehave a lot. Now, you know, it is so much better, far better, right, than what it used to be. It really is.
What are your biggest takeaways from the outside looking in of like concerns for the second version? And we can also open this up for like the Q&A later on. Where it's like, do you see anything? My biggest thing is the formation shifting, the micro jitter that I see every once in a while, and I think everything else is fine. Like it's just they hit each other. It's the jitter, and then it's some of the like the misplacements where like some will overshoot others. Oddly enough, like is there anything else that just kind of stands out? Obviously, the animations aren't in yet for the people that are in the seats. That's coming in.
Uh, I don't know. I don't mind the micro jitter. That stuff is kind of it's new. It's new stuff, so I don't really see that as much of a major problem
Sure.
in my eyes. Because you guys already know about it. You're already fixing it. You're already adjusting. You're already
Well, that's
working.
that's a
Oh,
failure in the formation system right there. The biggest thing is that like this is perfect because I'm stress testing the system as well. Every day I try and stress test it, or we'll get it to other people's hands so they can try and break them as well. Because like this is wrong. Those three took off, and the last one got lost in Aria. They should have waited for little Timmy. Even if the last one got stuck or needed some longer time to avoid, they needed to have stayed together and maintained the pack like they do for the infantry. So there's small little things that I'm noticing they're like definitely are going to like iron it out going into next week. I don't know. What else would you guys add? Like based off of like, because my biggest thing is I don't want to do what we did in Legacy. And Legacy for the Chinooks and for the Little Birds and for everyone else, like I mentioned, for movement, it would be do a shit ton of traces, hope that you could get them to the right cruising height, and then basically try and course correct and move them via like interpolations and like to get them out of the way of buildings. So they were very reactionary. Oh my god, I'm gonna crash into a building 5 seconds from now. And then they would like hit the fucking thing and get out of the way, or 2 or 3 seconds from now, depending on like the code. So this is like if I show the navigation, if I can spell, there's a navigation layer on the top that cuts out basically the buildings so that they know the buildings are there. And in the future, we'll probably make it a little bit more aggressive. So then that way, they skid the buildings much further away. Because I still don't like how close the navigation's building. Like if I pause it and I look, if I can zoom correctly, you can see that cut is how close they're allowed to get to the physical building in the worst case scenario. But realistically, I might double or triple that. to make it to where like they stay so far away from a building, there's no chance of them actually colliding. Think of it as like a safe margin or a safe buffer, and it would allow us to basically like really cut down the amount of potential collisions. Because like even this, I think like the crane, you can see like if I could properly zoom out, the crane is like only populating it like it's at that z hyph layer. So you figure like that layer right there, it's saying like avoid this section. But then there are other traces and other things that come into play when they have to get off the navigation mesh. So we did take some of the things that we learned, and there's still some course correction because we don't have a truly like 3D directional navigation mesh. It's more like a 2D plane, and then they have to get from cruising height to landing height. But there's a lot more validation. So like 99% of the movement's going to be on this navigation mesh, and then we're going to basically do some deep projections here and there, and like course correct as needed. Like when they're here, they're off the navigation mesh. So like you figure, but that's very far in between when you have a building that tall. And even then, it's just doing traces and doing spear traces to figure out like, oh, I can adjust to this altitude and there's nothing like, blocking me. But you can see like this is a use case that annoys the shit out of me because like you figure they're just all inside of each other right now, and that's stupid. So like use cases like this are going to have to be eradicated going into early next week, where you guys can see where the delay is occurring. We don't want to make the same mistakes as before. Fuck it, just put it out there. It's good. Fuck it, it's done. You know what I mean? Ship it. It's live. So fuck that. So one of the biggest things is like hunting down these little issues like this and trying to resolve them or fix them, so that like the helicopter AI is done and all we're doing is adding new variations. So going into next week, we'll hit a point where ideally these issues don't occur anymore. There's no more formation oddities. The animations are situated. The shooting works as it stands right now, but they don't look aesthetically pleasing. And obviously the transportation capability works. We'll get the rappelling in, and then at that point it would be getting in the other variations of the helicopters. So that's kind of like the spiel, because then at the same time it's the other variations, but it's also the weapons. Because you can notice that the skid's missing, and the little Timmy here doesn't even have his. He's not even properly sitting in the thingy. So we have to go through and get all that set up, get the skid set up because they're modular. So the idea is that in the experimental, we had it to where we would replace a good majority of it, and we would add objects to it based off of the loadout of like what kind of weapon you had. So that's something. This is all the things that I'll be doing going into next week: is getting the weapons in, fixing the navigation oddities, double checking the garrison system to make sure there's no issues. And again, everything I'm showing here works in multiplayer. We're just waiting until all the bells and whistles are in, so you guys actually have content to consume. And it's not just, oh, that's nice, and then plays it for like 30 seconds and deletes the units like that. So you figure, and then you can see even when they die, they don't ragdoll. So that was one of the things that Derek was working on, was setting up the ragdoll state like we had in the rebuild, where they would lose control and then they'd crash into something. So that was literally what he was doing like Friday night, and he'll probably do some stuff over the weekend on and off if he has, based off of his schedule, because you can see that guy landing on a ledge and he's just fucked. So you figure basically we'll have to add some validation for that, for the parachuting, so they don't land in areas that are inaccessible. That's always going to be fine. But you can see like they're dead, but they're not selectable. So that was one of the last things we were setting up, was that getting them situated so they can die. No one can target them anymore, and the guys parachuted out when their thing died, but it's still something we have to fix. So that is currently the state of helicopters. At this point, we're definitely going to blow past the estimate that we gave of a week. We've been on them for about a week and about 2 or 3 days, give or take. I would say that it's going to round out probably the end of next week to get them to the point where we're happy and we're done with the helicopters. But regardless, I've been working on Pandemic. So earlier in the week, I announced that the legacy rebuild, the legacy build is no longer getting any updates unless someone finds something so astronomically broken that I have to get in there. We're 2 programmers, and you figure me working on the legacy build means I can't do stuff what you guys really want, which is the Pandemic, the co-op, the bug fixes, the cracks fixes for the rebuild. Derek's been working on the helicopters basically by himself at this point, with some advisement and help from myself, situationally on and off. But it's gotten to a point where I need to just cut the plug, put the Band-Aid on, and I've triaged the legacy build, which is the version that you play when you buy the game by default, as much as humanly possible, without major rewrites and major systemic changes that would take days, if not weeks, easily. So one of the biggest things was like, okay, this is the bare minimum I feel like I could do at this point. We know the vehicle driving AI can be lackluster. We know that it's not very ideal, but to change that would be weeks. And at that point, we need to just move back to working on the rebuild and get to that in the course of how we're doing the helicopter AI. So I apologize about that. We know the vehicle driving AI is not amazing. So in some cases, you might have to baby them. But again, when we get to them in the confines of the end of pandemic, going into phase 3 now, based off of the poll we did on Discord, then we will address that. And we'll take it all the way down the line, and we'll take as much time as we need to make sure that they operate and function just like the helicopters, where they're vastly more superior. Yeah, we know about that, Deb. Is that sometimes they'll just do that. You have to baby them across bridges, we know. It's just use the control movement system for the time being and just buy us a little bit more time until we can get to the point of doing that. We apologize, but either we do the rebuild or we salvage the old build, and all of that work has to be deleted anyway. So it was like, well, fuck, like we need to just cut the plug, move on, do the rebuild, and get that situated, and then get it as quickly as possible at high quality to replace that build in the next 3 to 4 months. Is the only compromise that we could really feel out, which is another reason why we went back and we triaged it. Well, I triaged it as much as I could over the last 2 or 3 weeks. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to load into my pandemic map, which is pandemic test map, not save that map. And I saw it earlier, but I've been going in and I've been setting up Chelseys AI and getting them all situated so they function and they work in terms of the confines of like a co-op game, and basically setting up the onset of pandemic. So if I load in, you're going to notice right off the bat, I've been looking on the zone cards. This is all replicated and working in multiplayer as well. But the basic gist of it is that now you can see the zone name, the power amount, the surviving population, and then the infected population. So if I kill him and I kill him, because I don't want them to basically interrupt Chelsey, and if I turn on my debugging and then reload in, let's see if I can turn that on. There she is right there. That's Chelsey right there. And what she's going to do is she's going to go and build her primary hive like she does in the rebuild, in the legacy builds. So let me slow-mo 5 for sake of time. So she picked her pod. That is her alpha pod or her primary pod. You can identify it in the rebuild and the older builds by the coral. It has a higher health. It's more durable. It takes more hits overall. And one of the biggest things was setting up that base system going into this week of her AI plus the actual, I guess you could say the manager, and making some improvements to how the manager was functioned in Legacy versus the rebuild. Because in Legacy, they weren't very conscious of what was needed in a zone. They didn't really understand what was going on in some cases. So if you masked Apaches, GG, you win. If you masked tanks, GG, you win. They wouldn't understand the confines of like, oh, I'm under attack from these units. Let me pool my resources. Let me figure out what I can build and then bring them in. So one of the biggest things that we did this time around was making it to where this version of Pandemic has a more centralized decider, and it's not as decentralized of a bunch of zones figuring out what they need in that moment. And it's more of like a top-down perspective where there's a manager, a faction manager per se, that runs the subroutines and inventories everything it has at all times. And then it's like, oh, Chelsey just spawned. Let's get her out there and build her pod. After she builds her pod, then that's going to start an infection tick. And that infection tick is going to essentially start infecting everyone in that zone. And as it infects everyone in that zone, then we're going to send out workers. And those workers, those standard infected, are going to run around and spread the virus and build additional pods, which then in turn would increase the contagion level of the zone. So let me just unpause the game, and I'll do slow-mo 5. Now, for the case of this demonstration that I did for today, I didn't get to the point of setting up the workers. That's what I'm going to be doing going on the Monday. But you can see that if I go top down and I go to slow-mo 5, you can see that more pods are going to appear in the zone over time as she queues them in the zone. And this is simulating that people are running around and building those pods. And I'm gonna get to integrating and setting up the actual building of the workers and then sending them out and infecting, going into Monday, Tuesday. So my goal is by Monday to get this to a point where, like right now, they've already reached critical mass. So there's 4 zones that 4 pods that they can place in this structure in this zone before it like is tapped. And that was another thing is basically we're taking in a bite-sized layers. So now that I've gotten Chelseys AI set up, but she's just sitting right here chilling, and then we have her little alpha pod, and then we have the additional pods here, here, and here that are spreading the contagion. Now going into Monday, my goal is to make it to where now that the alpha pod spawns out some standard infected and then assigns them goals. Okay, you're gonna go spread in this district, you're gonna go spread in that district, you're gonna spread in this district. And right now, my goal is to make it to where she understands fully how to defend her one zone, how to how to basically contaminate that zone, and then how to defend that zone. So going into Monday, Tuesday, that's my goal, is to get all of that situated, get it to where she understands this zone, and then Wednesday, Thursday is going to be expansion and being able to per se like, okay, this zone B and C and D and E and F and all this other stuff, then she would understand that she needs to send a party over, or that the faction manager would say, okay, we've spent enough in A, let's send some people out to B, C, and D and set up some pods. And Chelsey is zoned to this pod. She can't leave this pod. There's like a little circle that basically keeps her here. Where that's her hive, that's her main home. She can't leave that, and that's the way it was in Legacy. That's the way it's going to be in the rebuild. The only difference here is we substantially buffed both Chelsey and the pod about 5 times what she was in Legacy, increased her damage and increased her health, to where like you can't come and bully her, at least not easily. And we'll see what kind of exploits other people come up with on Discord, because we're going to be very conscious of that. Is the whole point of Chelsey is you can't bully her. It's reverse cat and mouse. She's the most powerful unit on the game for quite a conceivable amount of time, and you coming over and fucking with her is a death sentence. So as I see those issues occur, as I see people basically having issues, or basically like she's too easy, or they're caging her, or they're doing this, then I'll be addressing them. For the ones I already know of, I'll be addressing them in our course AI, where she'll just break things instantly, or basically just be able to jump over fences. So little stuff like that. Yeah, sure. So that's the biggest thing, is basically being able to account for that to a certain degree. Because I mean, if you have custom emulators and you increase your length max, there's going to have to be some kind of compromise we do there, to where you can't just immediately just bully her into a corner and then she can never spread, and then the entire game falls apart. So it's one of those things where that's going to be something that we're going to be conscious of, and we're kind of working on. We might end up making her pod and her just invulnerable for the first early parts of the game, just to keep you away from her. I mean, she already kind of is, but she had the pod state, so maybe just the pod state's not in. That's something I'll be working on going into next week as well, where if you damage her to a threshold, she goes in her pod recovery state, she heals, and every time you do it, she gets stronger, her resistances go up. So that's something else that we'll be looking into, is seeing what we can alter there to make it to where like she actually is a threat. Because again, we don't want people caging her. We don't want people trying to drop her into the water. That's something that me and Derek have talked about, the TDM, where people will get a little bird. They'll get her to jump on the little bird, then they'll drop her in the water, and then she basically resets and breaks the entire game. So those are things that we're looking at to basically resolve. This is to the extent that I've gotten the base pandemic set up. In terms of the next steps is what I talked about going into next week, where it's the attacking, defending, the expansion. And then that way, by the time we get to Thursday, Friday, the goal is to have some kind of initial test. Most likely at that point, it will not support saving. Saving requires probably at least another 2 or 3 days to get all the saving systems working. So if we do have a build that you guys can play going into the weekend, you will not be able to save. If you crash, you're fucked. And the idea is you're just going into the playtest, see how it feels, leaving your feedback, and then going into next week, we'll fix those issues and then start working on the save system, and then updating the save system as new systems and new mechanics are added to the game. But just keep in mind that's something that we'll be conscious of, because our goal is by the end of the month is to get pandemic playable. so you guys can go and play it to the same level of Horde. So we're taking this in week sprints. While Derek's working on the helicopter AI and getting his stuff situated, I'm working on this. He'll join me the moment he's done with the helicopter AI, and he'll help me on basically getting the final systems over the edge. The Juggernaut, the unit virtualization, um, some nuances and small little changes that need to happen to the AI so they're not avoidant towards walls. Because we know that they're running exploit on Horde mode, and that has to be addressed regardless. And it'll be addressed. It has to be addressed for both modes regardless. Where they just don't. They have too much self-preservation to the point where if they see a wall, they'll go around the wall and they'll never actually target the wall. And they have some issues with their threat analysis where they'll like if you hit them hard enough from a unit, they just need to commit. If they're gonna die, it doesn't matter. They're too conscious of basically new damage hitting them. And then if one person hits them with a sniper and another person hits them with an M4, they can be going for the M4 guy first. They're within like 2 or 3 feet. Then the guy with the sniper hits them because it's a higher damage and a higher threat. It will pull them away from the M4 guy, even though they were just about to kill him. Run him to the sniper, and now they die. So it's like small little edge cases like that where we need to course correct their AI and make small little tweaks going in the pandemic just to make sure that you can't bait them by just having a higher tier weapon. Those are things that we're conscious of and things that we're working on going into the rebuild. Another thing I would mention, and this will also be fixed coming into the next couple of weeks, is that there is an issue with infected structures and CERC structures where sometimes when you lose a structure, the fog of war doesn't update like this. Like I destroyed those generators that this fog of war hasn't updated. So that's something that we're going to be working on going into the next week or so. But slowly but surely, we're chipping away and getting it to the point where it was in Legacy, if not much better. And you can see there's even like issues like this where these buildings are reading as large generators. So that's something myself and or Derek need to get into is that the world building is going to read their details of how many people are alive in that structure. Because if I hit escape at F11, and then go to the details panel, you'll notice that population contribution is 1,000 people, and then it's mapped to a zone. And then those little boxes are the civilian evac systems. Like those are the boxes that they go through that door, and then they come here, and then it's released into the navigation mesh for them to do the civilian evacuation. So that's something going into October that we're going to be working on, because again, the goal for September is the baseline entry pandemic mode. And then once we get that in y'all's hands, then October is going to be whatever leftovers are remaining from the Juggernaut and the LT AI, and then it's going to be civilian evac is the first thing on the agenda going into October after we finish the primary list. So I want to bring that up just really quickly just to address that, because I know a lot of people don't always, they skim over the news posts because there's a lot of hooply blah. There's a lot of shit on it sometimes. So what I want to do is that I want to bring up this news post that I wrote here, and it covers a section this here. So I do it in the things, but this is like a little summary we do of the CERC HQs. So if you're not able to make them, you can read this and see if it's something in it that you want to watch, and then you can basically go here and you can fast forward through it. We rebranded the beta branches to basically make it more obvious because we were getting questions on Discord and a lot of DMs myself and on Steam saying, what are they? So I made the descriptions a lot more clear, but what I wanted to hit upon is this right here. So this is everything we're doing in September. And as they're done, I'll cross these out. So you'll know up to the day, sometimes up to every other day, if like the moment this is done, you'll see this crossed out. The moment this is done, we'll cross this out. And the same thing for everything else. So right now, I'm working on this. So next week, I'll be knocking this out. And then Derek will be knocking this out, all of this out, going into next week, going into Friday. Maybe some bleed over. We'll see if there's any bugs or issues you guys run into. And the next thing he'll be working on is the custom game options of the following week. And then I've already done part of the Chelsey AI, as you can see. It's just a matter of just seeing what kind of exploits and issues you guys run into. Juggernaut AI will be ported over from Legacy, and it'll just be updated and improved. Because the base underlying AI wasn't terrible. It just needed a little more nuance, and he needed to understand better his role within gameplay, where he's more like a charger from Helldivers, where his job is to just run in there, take out a wall, take out some units, and be a distraction unit. He's a siege breaker. He needs to act like that. And then the save system is like what I talked about. That'll be the last thing we work on towards the end of the month. Is that basically like we'll get that build in. Let me look at my calendar. Hold on. So
Oh, you were talking about charges. Oh, I was playing Helldivers the other day, and I had like
I love
6 of
those.
them.
So yeah.
The new update's
Oh, I know.
actually out
I
today.
haven't had a chance to play it yet. I've been grinding no life and on Cepheus. I think I played Path of Exile for like
No, no.
an hour. And then I played Ready or Not with Michael, and then that was all I played this week. It was like 2 to 3 hours of games. Um, so going into next.
And I rode one of the.
Oh Lord. Oh,
Nice.
I don't even know what that is. I gotta play it in the Space Marine update.
Yeah, the Into the Unjust with the bug tunnels.
Yeah, no, I dig it. So going into the 7th, that's our goal, or that's
Yeah.
our initiative, is basically getting the helicopter AI rounded out next week, getting the base infected. So next week when we meet, we'll have more to show for the helicopters. We'll have the base infected and the AI spreading in. Well, I will. And then ideally, if I have a breakthrough sooner, then I would start on the, what would it be? It'd either be the save system or the tweaks to Chelseys AI. Because the biggest thing is that you figure you can't have a persistent game until the save system is in. And as we learned off of Broken Arrow, it's game breaking if it's in a mode where it's like you can't play it and you can't resume a game. So that's something that I'm going to be working on pretty extensively over that. I mean, the save system will probably take me a couple of days because I basically just have to make a base, inventory everything, save it, and then make sure when you load the map, it recreates it back to what you had previously. So I'll be going through and getting all that situated. So yeah, that'll round out the 14th to the 20th. Is like roughly the save system, some Chelsey AI, and then the Juggernaut and the save system. There'll be some bleed over going into the 21st or the 27th. But that's one of the biggest things. Like that pretty much is going to be the next couple of weeks as we just kind of go through these. And then obviously there'll be desyncs and bugs and crashes people will run into. So as those are brought up, we'll address them and talk to y'all and see if there's any issues that we need to fix. But that's the general gist. And then next month would be civilian evac and dynamic civilian groups, which is basically those are the civilians that run around. We learned a lot of things from experimental and the legacy ones, where it's like we're gonna be getting away from a lot of the more dynamic systems where we place structures down in areas, and then they would spawn in the center of a building. They would spawn in the middle of a road. Then they'd break your civilian evacs. They would break your unit pathfinding. They break your vehicles if they just pop up in the middle of nowhere, and then you're just fucked. So one of the things that we'll be doing going into next month is simplifying that to a certain degree of like preset, like the strongholds, where they were preset locations that were authored and vetted by a level designer to make sure they're not in like a crazy location, and then having some more warning or prerequisite systems that let AI know I'm going to place something here. And if I place it, your AI might be aware you need to go around, you need to detour, send a notification to the player so they understand that little Timmy, the Raiders, just set up a new faction here. They're in the middle of this road. So there'll be some cases where they're allowed, but not going to be allowed like in the beginning and the ending of a highway because your civilian evac buses didn't understand what to do. So they'd ram right into the wall, and then they were forever broken. So I ended up going into the rebuild. Sorry, the merge. Merge. The legacy build. I'm going to the legacy build, and I ended up placing that system in. Well, you'll notice that in the legacy, they use preset locations. And that was one of the things that I triaged, was making it to where there was about like 5 to 6 locations in every zone that was set by myself. And they check that, they make sure there's no navigation there, they make sure you have it built there. And then they'll basically they'll make their faction over that zone or that plot now. And that'll be the same concept or the idea that we push towards them going into next month. So that's one of the biggest things that I wanted to hit upon. And then obviously at that point, it's vehicles and doctrines, which is going to be basically the same way that we approach the helicopters is the same way we're going to approach them. We're going to do the vehicles first, and then we'll do the doctrines last because everyone just wants their Abrams, their Bradley, their all the other stuff. So we'll do that immediately after that, and that'll round out the end of the year. So in a hindsight, our biggest goal is to get to a point by December, Christmas, where all the phases are in, the game is back to what it used to be, and then we can merge it down, basically. So there's no more of like the legacy build. There's no more of like the old merge. It's all gone. It's all deleted, and there's only the rebuild. Kind of like what Rust did 10 years ago, where they ended up having to like reprogram their entire game because they had the same issue we had, where it grew so large and there were so many mechanics and systems that were added over time. They were not in lockstep, and they had the same issue we had. So It's one of the biggest things is we want to make sure we're building a foundation that is like healthy, that's easy to add on to, and that like we're taking the time that's necessary, even if we're getting a lot of external pressure from our Steam review score to this, and we're not fast enough, we're not doing this quick enough, we're not doing that quick enough. I'm sorry, but at the end of the day, it's going to take the time it takes. You want a game?
Well, speaking
Yeah.
of Rust, right? Speaking of Rust, you got to remember it used to be a zombie survival.
Did it?
They completely rebuilt the game.
I don't know.
They took all that out and completely rebuilt it to what it is now.
Oh, you're right. I forgot about that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it used to be
Yeah, it
Yeah,
used,
they
it
still have
used to be
the
a zombie
chips
survival.
and the loading.
Oh, I didn't.
Beware,
Oh.
zombies. There's no
Yeah, I
zombies.
didn't even know that was a thing. I forgot about that. And then now you're mentioning it, I remember reading an article about that. But to us, the most important thing is to
Yeah.
maintain that quality all the way through. So we'll have to just deal with the negative flack and the negative attention just based off of like, we need to take an even road all the way through of like, we hear what you guys are saying, but we can't address it immediately. We're 2 programmers, 2 level designers, 1 animator / character modeler / weapon modeler / rigger. So we wear a lot of hats, and we have day jobs. So you figure with the cover, when we don't make that much money. So you figure that's why we have the Patreon, all the other stuff, and that's great, and that helps cover it so we can do more work during the month. So we don't have to take as many hours at our day jobs. But just understand the reality of what everything that can be done is being done. You know what I mean? In terms of basically the transparency, in terms of the development, in terms of basically just making sure that you guys are getting a product that you paid for. Which I understand there was some flack there that we got of like the horde mode, whatever. But we'll basically, I just want to address that right off the rip because I know that we've been getting a little bit of criticism there. We do need to do another video with our community to showcase the state of the game. I was waiting until we got a baseline pandemic functional, and then I was wanting to do a video for Horde and Pandemic with 2 different crews. So that's something that I'll try and schedule going into this month. Is we'll try and have a public playtest where we basically just get people to record their screens for a pandemic game and for a normal game. And then that way I'm able to put on the Steam store 2 different live streams of the Horde experience versus the pandemic experience. And then obviously the operator interplay and the new hub and all the other fun, sexy stuff. I am aware of several bugs that I'm going to hunt down and fix going into Monday about the engineer building. So I'll have to squeeze those in of like the engineer building towards walls and the engineer building in terms of like a freeze if you have used too many engineers, I guess. So thank you, Deb, for subscribing to our Patreon. I don't think people realize how much that actually helps, but it helps on our negative months. So you figure, especially since the rebuild, that's a lot of negative months. So, but we're willing to take the hit and basically just, invest in the future over short-term games. Because like we could have just kept building off of the old foundation and not told anyone. But we were like, no, fuck that. We need to fix this because we want to keep building Cepheus over years. It's not just a one and done or a sequel or some other bullshit. We wanted to make it to where it's more like a Stellaris. So I do appreciate that, and that does help out. Because I saw that flash on my phone a second ago, but I didn't know if you were in the room because I was, yeah. But that's one of the biggest things is hitting upon those, and do keep your critiques, keep your feedback, and let us know how we're doing in terms of the rebuild, any bugs that are coming up. If you guys run into something that is so earth-shatteringly broken for the old build that I had to triage, let me know. Make a post. If it's big enough, if it's bad enough, I'll go in there and see what I can do. Worst case, if it's invasive enough, I might have to pull some other artists. That's the only thing that could delay us to this point is those kind of bugs. And I've tried to take a line of like, unless it's like earth-shatteringly bad and it's breaking your experience, like we probably won't fix it in the legacy build because we need to focus on the rebuild. But if it's bad enough, let me know and I'll do my best to basically address it alongside the current workflow. And I'll be conscious of that going in every Saturday, letting you guys know I had to work on this. That's why we miss these deadlines and miss this or that. For that level of transparency. Michael's working on some new infected types for the standard infected, between the standard and the special, in terms of like some slasher type infected. Basically looking at like Dead Island, Dead Space, Resident Evil, and he's coming up with some ideas that I'm approving right now to basically push towards the forefront of having new types of standard infected / special infected, where they're more melee oriented AOE attacks, kind of like the sledgehammer guy, but having more different mutations and whatnot. So we'll have more of those to show next week in terms of basically the progress we've had on that. When it comes to Dimitri for the hub, he's pretty much just working through and doing his stuff. Oh, I'll bring that up. Let me actually, before I get ahead of myself on Dimitri, let me show what Efren's been doing. So last week we showed 2 maps, and I showed one other. I showed one of the maps in Discord, share screaming it to the Patreons because they were curious what is the new replacement map. So I just want to really quickly reiterate this and just show it, and then we're going to go into the what other thing Efren's been working on, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. And then you guys can pick my brain, ask any questions, voice your concerns, and we'll end the Q&A. We'll end the podcast at that point. So let me just load up this map. It's probably been so they've been basically going in and merging over and bringing over legacy assets from the old SDK, which takes some manual labor here and there, because when you translate over between SDKs, names can change, conventions change, standards change. So they've been going through and just kind of, Efren's been going through and essentially vetting those, bringing them over, fixing material compile issues, double checking the navigation. Because from the Horde map, we discovered certain variations or certain combinations of assets that when they were coupled together or placed together in a close proximity, they would cause navigation building issues. And it was brought to our attention when we had a smaller scale map. People were always noticing that around these intersections or around these areas, the AI would act funny. And we were like, maybe that was why we got that report and we were never able to reproduce it in the legacy builds. So before he's allowed to go into working on San Francisco and get everything else working, get that all sexy and nice, he's going on a grid by grid, basically you can say audit, to go through every Treasure Island neighborhood, every Angel Island neighborhood, and then San Francisco North for what is there, to basically make sure there's nothing that's odd that could potentially come back and fuck us. Because one of the biggest things for the rebuild was essentially cementing it to where this is done, this is final, there's no take backsies. So you can see this is the pandemic map you guys are going to be playing on when we either next Friday or a little bit after Friday is what we'll be basically pushing for you guys to play as your incubator, your vertical slice map that is basically has all the factors that we'd keep building into. So it says Horde Wave, ignore that. It doesn't work on this map. I have to skin this and basically make it more user-friendly for the end consumer. But for right now, at least, you can see that the zones were refactored a little bit. There will be some refactors that happen here and there. These zone cards will be made clickable. You can see that the buildings were all converted to the systems that we had in Legacy, where every building would tell you their population. The detail card down here hasn't been updated. We need to make a neutral faction for bridges and infrastructures, because we have a faction system in the game, and if there's no faction assigned, it just does the CERC equal faction name class. So basically, we have to go through and prune the data and make it to where it doesn't display all of this meaningful information, less information for you're selecting a non-playable entity, like a structure or whatever. So you can see that slowly but surely we're baking in those systems. And because we made quite a few systems to how the game works for selection, you can now tab select a building and then lock to it and then press Q and E to rotate around it. There's little small improvements that we've made for quality of life. It's not that much, but theoretically it would add up for I want to click on this, press tab, it'll jump you to the structure, and then you can press Q and E to rotate around it and then zoom in and out. Small little things that we've done to kind of move towards the direction of more a traditional RTS game where everything is selectable, everything gives you information. That was a huge fuck up that we made in Legacy, where it was very convoluted and very hard to make something selectable. You had to go through Blue's Clues of what do you call that, of musical chairs to set up a new object to be selectable. But the new system that we programmed in the rebuild allows it to be anything can be selectable within fucking 30 seconds, 20 seconds at most. The old system took a new object could take an hour, couple hours. But you can figure like, and there's still some issues with the dynamic. Like these boxes, these are generated dynamically, so you might notice some issues. Like that one's not selecting properly, where like it's selected but it's not showing the box. So we're gonna have to hunt down those problematic assets and figure out what's wrong with their collision. And it's using the object's collision or their bounds per se to dynamically generate those boxes. So those boxes aren't artists created; they're just programmatically created dynamically. I know there's a lot of technical bit, but I just want to go into what's being done over the last couple of like weeks or so to just explain like why some things might take longer. Um, and you can see like these are no longer horde objectives as well. They're just skinned assets that just you could go here and then you'd have the cleanse and condemn going into Octoberish. That's when you would see this down here. And then these clickable will probably wait to the last minute. I retract there of like going to civilian evacuation because technically there's no point in making these clickable until civilian evacuation is implemented. So there's going to be a flow. There's going to be a progression as we go, and you'll also see the population and all the other stuff I mentioned. But this is the basic pandemic map, and we'll have it to where the carrier initially is just going to be a unit that you can build from. It's not going to move until we get to the end. When we put the Leviathan in, is when we have to dedicate the resources to making the carrier move again. And the carrier moving is probably a week or two just on its own. Because at the same time, we have to set up these doors. I put that off. We teased it like in January, and then I couldn't in good confidence dedicate that many resources to just something that was a non-cosmetic way, a non-gameplay implemented way of like basically these doors open, a sky crane gets raised, it takes a vehicle, it takes a structure, and then it delivers it instead of the sky crane just spawning somewhere. Based off of how much of a time crunch we are in terms of making sure that we're delivering content and showing things, since that's like a cosmetic thing. We're going to get to the point of working with my visual artist to get this implemented. And I'll show you guys really quickly so you have an idea. But that's something that I had to just cut where it's like, it's animated, it's set up. There's some workflow things that need to be improved because it's very hard to work with in terms of the way that the artist set it up. But that's something that we'll seek to rectify when we work on the carrier, is setting up that system and then setting up the LCACs and then making sure the carrier is actually at the right boat depth. So it's something else that technically will come in around the time that we do like the getting the carrier movable, around the time of the Leviathan. Leviathan's going to be next month at this point. So the carrier, Leviathan, and all that will be part of the civilian evac push with the birds. Because like we have to put up the LCAC, set that up. So that'll be a major contributor to around the civilian evac period of time, is getting that set up so you can move this. Because this is just right now the static entity that you can build off of. And right now there's no way of it really being destroyed. It's more of a deployment module. And going into the rebuild sometime next week, I'll set it up so that when you build the CERC tent, you can only build one of these. And you have to build them first like you do in Pandemic. And once you build them, basically, if it gets destroyed, you lose. So that's going to be the lost condition. It's going to be an and or. And then when we add the Leviathan, it'll also be the carrier or your CERC tent. And I was talking to this with a lot of people on Discord, because we sit in the room, we talk after we do playtests, and we just have hours-long discussions and whatnot. So one of the things that we were discussing, and I'll put it out there one more time into the ether, I put it out in that news post briefly from a couple days ago, is that when this CERC thing would land, it would have a button for pay to transport. You click on that, and you'd be able to transport it and relocate it to like another base. So let's say this base is going to fold, or you're about to die. Then you could click on it, choose a thing, and then it would pay to have the sky crane come, hook it up. It might take like 30 seconds for it to arrive. It would hook it up. You have to defend it while it's being hooked up, and then while it's moving, it can be attacked by spitters and juggernauts. So the idea is that you have some skin in the game. You can actually lose the game again, because as it stands in legacy builds, it was a fucking snore fest. You can't lose, especially if you turn off the juggernaut. And sorry, the Leviathan, GG, the carrier never gets attacked. You're basically God for the entire duration of the game, and that's never how I intended it to be, where it was basically just easy mode RTS. So that's something that I want to push going into this rebuild, is to have it to where this actually has weight. You have to protect it, and it's your main command post, and not put it back to Winters, because that just made it to where nobody wanted to use her, because she was a combat unit. So we're going to make that little sidestep of making this your defendable main HQ with the CERC thing when the Leviathan is added. You click a button, you can transport it, and that I'll open up for discussion if you guys want to throw anything tidbits in there. But that's something that I'm going to be putting in going into this next week or so as well. I'll sneak that in along the major line items after I get the infection spreading system functional. Because again, once I get it working on that map and I'm happy, sometime around Wednesday, Thursday, I'd go to this map and set her up and then start running simulations of spreading, how fast is she spreading, what do I need to tweak, set up the initial values, and then leave it for Derek to come in and do his custom game settings the following week. So then that way you guys can change the pace if it's too fast or too slow. So now what I wanted to do is I was going to show the last thing that Efren's been working on because he fixed his zones and the other visual issues that we had a couple weeks ago. And then I'm going to open up the open world master, which is basically the main course that he's been working on right now. Because he's pretty much done on Half Moon Bay's pandemic version. There's nothing else to be done there. He ported over all the assets, and anything else is just fixing the collision as we run into them, as the map is play tested and looking for visual ID issues or other stuff like that. But pretty much what he's delegating or putting in 99.9% of his time is this map right here, where sometime between October and December, this would become the map that gets added onto the rotation to replace Treasure Island and become the mainline way that you play the game. So whenever it loads, I'll show you. I know someone in Discord asked for an ETA earlier, but all I'm going to say is between October and December at this point. And there will be areas that aren't textured. Like in San Francisco North, there might be entire neighborhoods that aren't textured. But if you want to play it, you're welcome to play it. And it'll just have a disclaimer saying that every other week, we'll just be putting in new textured assets as the kind of deal. I know that I talked to Krieg about potentially helping out because he was going to go around and basically spruce up the neighborhoods and make small little environmental detail areas, like where there's car crashes here, a bunch of dead bodies, like a barricade that got overran. So I've been talking to some people to basically help populate the city because there's a lot to go around. You'll understand how big it is when this map loads. It's about 3 to 5 times, give or take, 3 to 4 times the current map size. So when it loads, I'll show you. And you'll see the changes that are going into it because one of the biggest things is that Treasure Island is going to be changing on the southern tip to facilitate how the real world version of Treasure Island looks. In terms of basically the hill, Chelsey's villa location is going to change, and small little changes here and there just to make it fall more in line with the real world version. Angel Island's location will be pushed back a little bit more. The real Treasure Island that we've been building as the main menu will be added with the interiors gutted because the interior models are only for the hub, and then everything else on that map is purely just meant for the for the RTS. So here's the map as it stands. Let me just wait for it to load. It's doing some shader compiling because Efren's been going through and just doing his stuffs. So I might lag a little bit, but this is the general gist of what they're kind of going through and what he's been building through. Is that right now he's kind of going through all the neighborhoods and making sure all the assets came over from our old SDK. All the cars are in their old locations. All the trees came over. The pumpkins are there for when we do Halloween events. Is that they show up during Halloween events only because we're a horror game, so fuck it. But you figure those are small little things that he's just kind of going through and fixed. Like this building had a really bad collision that we discovered from the rebuild, and then we went back and patched it into the legacy because its navigation got corrupted somehow. But you can see as it stands, that island's gone. The one that used to be our ghetto version of Treasure Island. That's gone. And the real Treasure Island will be added with an exterior version somewhere around here. And that'll probably be everyone's favorite Total Island, probably. And then you can see that the power plant island's being removed because that doesn't exist in real life. Presidio over here is removed because that doesn't exist in real life. And those assets are being folded and merged into the main course, which is basically San Francisco North here. So once he gets to the point in the next, let me unhide that. Once he gets to the point in the next week, give or take, probably about 3 to 4 more days, of vetting every object's collision. Because if I show navigation, you can see how mundane this is. You just like basically go around and look at every asset and make sure navigation is being built. Objects that have collision are affecting the navigation because there's a discrepancy between collision and navigation in the Unreal Engine, where you could turn on collision on this car, but then not turn on the flag so it affects navigation. So AI will think they can walk through it, even though the physical collision of the object is incorrect. So they're not in lockstep. There's not a parity there. And it's up to each designer to implement it as they see fit in terms of like navigation versus collision updates, collision as a whole. So you'll see a reshuffling of this area here with the island and the hills in this area going into like the next week or so. I met with him yesterday, and he said that the last thing he was working on was Angel over here. So he's just kind of going through and making sure that Nike Airbase and everything else has all the assets. I believe, from what I'm remembering loosely from what he said yesterday, he's probably like a couple of days out from finishing this. And then at that point, oh, there's Z fighting from the landscape versus the static mesh. So I'll have to, let me just screenshot that before I forget. And then I'll just screenshot that and put it in his reports channel. But anyway, that's one of the biggest things is just we're just kind of going through and just porting over assets and getting everything back the way it used to be. And he'll get to a point in the next 48 hours, I would wager, to this is all done. It's exactly how it is. No downgrades. Every tree, every stump, every car is exactly where it was. If they were a landscapable previously, they're a landscapable this time around, you know, with the new system that we programmed. The beaches will stay because that'll be where the ALCACs come, and we'll push other stuff in there. I'm not going to discuss just yet those beaches in the future. So then once he's done with that and he's vetted the entire island, he'll start on augmenting and getting this area situated. So we'll have something to show for that. We have some loose, ugly plans, and I'm not going to show because it's ugly. But the idea would be is that he'll just be conforming it to how it. Look it up on Google Maps, and you'll get an idea of what we're going to be doing. Basically, it's Chelsea's villa, and this is going to be put on top of a hill that's right above the little tunnel. A lot of these areas are going to be moved around and maneuvered, like over here into small little boroughs. There's a lot of new recent development in San Francisco in terms of basically like where the freeway on-ramp is. Like this area right here is a nice high-end housing district. So he'll put the police station and some of these high-end houses trickling along that road, going up onto the hill where Chelsea's villa is. And then some of these homes will be like intermingled and moved around a little bit. So again, it'll happen pretty quickly because landscape work is pretty quick. It's really just going to be getting to the texture work in here. That's going to take a majority of our time because this is like a labyrinth, a beast for 2-level designers. Typically, you'd have like a dozen minimum to go through this and do it in a reasonable amount of time. So we figure, ideally, the moment I can pull Dimitri over from the hub, I will. But I don't want to just start something and not finish it. We're getting enough flack on that as it is. In terms of basically like a little bit of pressure, we move everyone around, rearrange the table to try and make everyone happy. We can't make everyone happy. We're just gonna have to take the hits and finish with the pace and the precision that we can do with the smaller team size. So at this point, this area is relegated to basically like the moment he finishes that area and the main line, he'll set up the bridges, get them so they build navigation, they work, get the collision all set up. And then ideally around that point, going into, let's say, like the mid part of this month, going into like the autumn sale, we'll have Dimitri come over and help to start populating this, and we'll break it up into grids because we need to get this done. In terms of like I don't know if it's going to. Let me check something. I might be able to play. What are you gonna say?
Will that big bridge be
only in chunks? Yeah, I didn't think I was gonna play. There's probably too many. This map is not playable right now as it stands because they've been still porting over assets. Last time I played it was like a dynasty ago. So here be dragons. I'm gonna try and play it so I can show the RTS scale of it. Because the problem is that the camera FOV here is 90, and the FOV is like there's different things that go into play of showing the scale of the map. So let me see if it'll play. It probably won't because this map hasn't been vetted by a programmer yet. Oh, it does work. It didn't crash. Yeah, okay. Yeah, because the performance is going to be terrible on this map. But you can get a gauge of just generally how big the map is by going over here and be playing in it. So yeah, you can kind of get it because like you see the freeways hidden and other things aren't like properly shadowing because people there has to be like an optimization path someone goes through and does where they set like the shadows and how far they render from and setting up post-process volumes or PPs to basically get everything situated. I don't think these buildings are not clickable, or at least some of them are. So like that's an example where like as these buildings are converted over to playable entities, then we'll do that. Because again, the goal of everything that we're working towards is this is the main course. Those are the baby tutorial islands that you've been playing on for years. And you can see this is the mini map in terms of the size. Where this is supposed to be this is going to be the final total playable area. We're probably going to pull the camera down because we don't want to allude to the idea the Bay Area is playable. What we want to do is have it to where the playable area starts from Treasure Island and then it goes slightly to that bottom left area where the Planet of the Apes go, in that movie where they go in like to the hills, where they run past the Golden Gate. So we want to make it to where there's one region that's entirely forest and very, very rural. So that'll be our area that's like kind of a microcosm of Angel over here. But it's like the entire area is just hills and valleys and forests. That way we get a very diverse play area. And then you have enough maneuverability for the carrier to move around these little canals. Because roughly around here is going to be the edge of the map. And then around here. And then this is correct in terms of that edge. It needs to be edited a little bit. Because you can see the water here. They're debugging. And then the play area would probably extend another inch or two down this way. Actually, no, it'd be 3 inches. Because you have to cut. Yeah, so it'd be by about 2 to 3 inches down this way. And that would be the total play map is here, to here, to here, to here. So that's what we're working towards as we just slowly but surely just kind of carve out the gameplay and just kind of get the rebuild. Because there's different teams, or I'd say teams like we're large. There's 2 people working on the map. And then maps, so they'll be going through this. And then I'll briefly show the hub so you can see what Dimitri's are working on. Dimitri's like one of those perfectionists where he doesn't like to show anything that's not final to you guys. So I have to use a crowbar and beat him with it whenever he doesn't like want to commit something for a CERC HQ. He's like, it's not done yet. I can't show it to anyone. It's not perfect. And I'm like, oh, fuck. So you figure if I go into that really briefly, I'll show some of the changes that he's done where he's added on these little nettings and just done the meshes. And he put in the skylights and he's been kind of upping the detail and using nanite to basically improve the visual quality of these zones. There is some Z fighting. He's running those down and fixing them as he finally, like you can see like this area doesn't have Z fighting. That one does actually. But you figure like he's just kind of going through and addressing them and putting in the cages and putting in the netting. And like he'll probably make like a system where it dynamically populates these cages or whatever. So he doesn't have to do it by hand, I would imagine. Putting in the actual like skylights here. Because we want players to be able to come here and plan. Whether you be an RTS, whether you be an operator, this is your home. This is your hub. So like you could go to like up here if you're not playing as the operator, like fuck the operators. Then you could just basically, go to the camera and then you can see all the players, you can see operators that are running around the hub. You can kick people from here if you're the host. And the idea is in that way, RTS players, this is your host. This is your lobby pregame screen. And for operators, then this is your lobby pregame screen. If you're bored, you want to run around, you want to explore, when we get to the point of populating this with NPCs that walk around and have a job and do things, going into December, then you'll be able to explore. And be able to like see what CERC is as an organization kind of deal. So you can see the small little details here that he's been putting in. It's one guy, so he's been doing his damnedest to basically just kind of go in and just populate these meshes. And there was an issue, I think Quivly brought it to our attention, where one of our flags for nanite was like bugging out, which was nanite mesh quality. Is that basically that was causing some people to get very poor performance. So it was basically setting itself to a flag that was incorrect and out of range. So you'll notice that the next patch that we put out, going into like early next week with the helicopters, are going to have that fix bundled in there. So you'll notice that on older hardware and on some video card, even newer hardware, newer hardware won't matter as much because it eats the shit up. But older hardware that's like the 1060s, the 220s, and the 30s, they will benefit from that change. Because you figure it'll just make it easier for them to render. You can do it via console commands if you look it up as a temporary workaround until we get that patch out the helicopters. But just keep in mind that like basically it was like setting itself so high that it was basically like rendering it as like just crazy detail. So even at the lowest, like if you're low, it basically lowers the quality of the nanite meshes, so they dynamically go to the like an ugly looking mesh, and you can see the difference if you go up to a fence. Like the fences that we have in the level, but those are modeled, and they're basically nanite fences. And like if I go here, this might be a good example. I don't know because it's not netting, so it probably won't look as obvious. But if you go to a one that has like the nesting, let me see. Yeah, you can't really see the difference there because there's no interlocking, so you can't actually see the fine tail details there. So if you go and you look at a certain mesh in the game, you'll see what I'm talking about, and you'll know what's going on there. And again, I'll be like kind of just meeting with them and just updating you guys as we go into next week to just show more progress here. And then what else is there? Oh, right. Sorry. There was an area that was added here. Is that basically this is like that goes up to the second floor. It's all inaccessible, and then you have like the actual warden's office. So technically, it's small little things that he's just kind of setting up and just slowly but surely just kind of getting filled in as we get the hub populated. There are going to be some small changes that he makes to the texture quality of like this structure and these, just to make them pop and look more aesthetically pleasing. So after he gets the main wing situated going into this month, because our goal is to try and have him done with this month, done with this by the end of the month. But it'll just kind of depend in terms of like the time that goes into the assets. So we'll regroup on that and update you guys every week as he's just kind of working on getting this jailhouse situated. And another big reason for getting it done to a higher fidelity is because the cutscenes, I'm trying to knock out 2 birds with 1 stone. I've gotten some flack over that, but we have to do the campaign. I'm thinking long term. I'm thinking not just what's needed now. I'm thinking what's needed 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 steps down the line. And by getting the hub situated now, I put myself in a better place for 2026. Because an entire section does not need to be designed or situated for when it comes to that. So it's one of those things where it's like for the cutscenes and the gameplay and just kind of exploring the hub and having like, an XCOM type like switcher for the campaign. This needed to be done. And then it also knocks out the RTS element for like all of this is going to be gutted and cleared out for you to build on. And then obviously just for a hub for a better main menu. Because that main menu from the Legacy was horrendous. So that pretty much sums up everything that we've been working on going into this week. So now what I want to do is open it up for y'all's questions and just kind of see what you guys want to just bring up in terms of questions, concerns, anything that we might be doing that we haven't thought of. So I'll open it up for questions for about 10 to 15 minutes. And then at that point, we'll wrap and we'll conclude for that. So I see Phoenix just has his hand raised. So I'll invite him to speak. And let me switch it over to the... All yours, Phoenix.
I will say. No,
He
go
hasn't
on, Phoenix.
joined yet. We're going to say, Durbar, fill the air.
Something I will say is what I am definitely most excited about, right, is with the new vehicle mechanics and the way you guys are sort of adjusting and changing the vehicles to move with the infantry. That has me very excited because I'm a bit of a pest and I love to put machine gunners on
Oh, I
helicopters.
know. I used to watch you play on a stream. You'd stream for me, and all I would see you do and other people do is basically you would put like 1 billion miniguns or like the flamethrowers on the scientists, and they just run by and do drive-bys. That's perfectly fine. But the biggest thing is that Chelsey has to have more countermeasures to get you to like go away. Because the biggest thing that we didn't account for great enough in pandemic is the amount of bullying and the amount of like people that weren't going to turtle, people that were going to go on the offensive, and they were going to try and intentionally break our AI. So this time around, we're planning for that in terms of having more, I guess you can say, fallbacks, more redundancies, and having more fail-proof, I guess you can say, tweaks to Chelsey at her initial pod that she places down to make it to where like what you're doing, if you just throw 3 or 4 heavies on a little bird and drive it directly to Chelsey, she's just going to slap that out of the sky and kill everyone. So people know, like, you can contain her, you can build around her. She's not going to come out of her cordon for like that little pod that she initially makes, her alpha pod, but you still have to contend with the standard infected and lieutenants and all the other stuff. So then that way there's an actual like combat there, and there's not too much of a power imbalance, because the idea is you're trying to get shuttle rounds to the point where you can kill her permanently.
I do think it would be pretty entertaining to see how that'll play out as well. You know, the contagion area, the sector that's being
Yeah.
affected, gradually responding to what units you have. Because realistically, people.
You're cutting out, by the way, Krieg. You're like super quiet. Yeah, you're like, you'll
Oh,
say a
yeah.
couple words and your mic will turn on. Oh, you're better now.
What about now? Okay. Yeah, no, I'm just saying, like users are going to be using like armor and mechanized to keep a borderline, and probably using aerial to transport troops in from the back or to try and secure more land inside. So that'd be pretty cool, especially with like the formations that you've got now with the
Yeah.
helicopters.
Because those formations are amazing.
Good
Like,
to
you
see.
figure when it comes down to them, in terms of basically like them actually, you don't have to sit, like in Legacy, you had to babysit them. You had to move the little birds separately, and then you had to move the infantry separately, and then you had to hope that one didn't overshoot. So there was a lot of babysitting. So now with this new system, with some more corrections going into
Yeah.
Monday, Tuesday, you're going to actually have a protective buffer or a bubble around your infantry. Because I remember when I would record the trailers, and I would just do my gameplay with the VTOLs, which those things are amazing, with the miniguns, they were so fast that they would just leave the infantry behind, and I would use the VTOLs. Yeah,
Yeah,
I would
no,
use the
they were-
VTOLs and drop them in.
They were hilariously
Yeah,
fast.
and that's the biggest thing with that the system don't understand. They need to ramp down their speed and calm down a little bit. So I would drop them, repel them in, and then I'd use the VTOLs as like a quick, like if they were about to lose or something went horrible, I could land them to get them back in and get them out of there by putting it in the flight mode. But then I could also use the miniguns to like, provide a little bit more additional security. So now with this approach, I can just apply everyone to one group, tell them all to move down that street, and the VTOLs will just make their protective bubble around them. And the infantry will just know, move at the slowest speed of the slowest unit in the information, and the VTOLs will do the same, and everyone's happy. So I think it's day and night in terms of basically accommodating those kind of strategies. Now, I do see a question on Discord relating to buildings. Dub0SP asks, will it ever be possible to get units on a roof intentionally, not crash landing? So as it stands right now, you can already do that with the rappelling and the landing mechanic. I'm going to be putting in there. So when I get the time to work on the AI going into the end of this month or next month, I'm going to be putting in these nav links that we learned from the RTS co-op map, and that will allow certain types of infected to just jump on the roofs and basically like Kool-Aid man your units. So the Juggernaut, the little guys, some infected are going to be built around the idea of that mobility, so that you can't just hide on a roof all the game. We'll probably work around not having the standard infected enter every structure for the time being, because we need to find a better workflow for setting those up. I mentioned that previously in the Discord channel, is that having every single unit walk through the entrance of the buildings, I need to find some time with Derek to R&D a better solution, because what we did on the RTS co-op map for having units enter and exit buildings is impossibly hard to set up to the scale of the maps that we have. So it's something that's going to be like, we're going to have to find the time in the next month or two to implement that in a better approach by writing a custom nav link, I think, at that point. But there are some plans to account for that going into this map, which is why on top of that, you'll notice that on the Horde map, a lot of the rooftops have like stairwells and ladders and other miscellaneous objects that have been placed up there. So when we get to that point, tech-wise, from the prototype we did on RTS Co-op, we'll be able to implement that, and you'll know where they're going to leave and where they're going to exit, so you would know where to protect. Hopefully that answers your question. And then, Phoenix, you had a question?
Yeah, I
Hit
kind
me
of
with
have
it.
several. So this might have to put me in witness protection, but I'm going to ask it anyway. So, first one, can there be some type of contested area when defending area in horde maps, probably pandemics? So, like for example, if you get pushed back to like the airfield, can the infected have like some type of that giant horde mass spawn in that area, like just on the border?
You're talking about pandemic, right?
Horde map specifically, but pandemic too.
So when would this come into play? So I understand.
So, like for example, let's say if you lose storage
Mhm.
or warehouse, and you get pushed back to the can't remember the name of it, the
Yeah, the
CERC
regional.
HQ,
Yeah.
the giant tower. Yeah, so like, can the that giant horde mass basically be like on a border and kind of snipe enemy units until like the player actually decides to commit resources to destroying that?
Oh, you're talking about being able to counterattack the infected in the zones that have been contested.
Well, the opposite, more like this kind of supports the infected. So basically, if the basically like to soften up the players. So like if they build too big and you basically can't take it, like the affected get hard. Basically, the affected kind of have a hard time taking the CERC HQ. They can just build like these giant towers just on a border.
You're saying that
their
basically in horde mode, you're
territory.
suggesting that they can use build mechanics of like placing even just the defense emplacements or gas towers or like other additive structures that kind of give you a little more of a hassle. Yeah, because StarCraft
Yeah.
2 does that for their horde, for their co-op mode. But they'll have it where when an AI faction comes in, they'll place like prefabs or small little structures around you where they're spawning their enemies off map, but they also have those like objects on map that make it to where you can't immediately just run to their spawn point. You actually have to like work your way through their defense emplacements. Let me think about
Exactly like
that. I don't have an answer on that just yet, but that's not a bad idea. Now that I'm programming, because like the pod did not exist until a couple days ago. Like the infection pod, Chelsea's Hive didn't exist. So now those systems are coming in; they're being implemented. Those are things that I can look at to get implemented. Because the gas tower in Horde is just a visual, and it's really just a volume that's applying damage. So when I put in the gas tower sometime in the next week or so, that'll be one more thing that I can put onto their rotation of things that their faction manager can deem as like, hey, set up these emplacements just to make more of a buffer on the border zone and maybe cause some players to not overextend so much.
Yeah, that's exactly
Okay.
where I was going.
Well,
with.
let me write that down and I'll come back to that. And then what was your other question?
So this one, I'm not sure if it was Darnerville or Krieg that said it, but this one refers to the bridge. So you know how you have a bunch of players that like to destroy the
Everybody
bridge.
does it.
Everybody do. Can it be possible that the infected can like either build their own bridge or reinforce
That's something
the
that we're
bridge?
looking at going into the Half Moon Bay one. Intentionally does not have a bridge, so that way we don't have to bite off more than we can chew in terms of mechanics and systems to account for. When it comes to the map that I just showed for Half Moon Bay, sorry, not Half Moon Bay, the Bay area, which is going to be the replacement of Treasure Island, that one is going to be the time when we address that. We wanted to basically like manage the amount of things that could potentially go wrong and the amount of stuff we have to R&D and program at any given time. So when we get to that, we're looking at a couple of options that we're going to test. And we're going to test on Discord predominantly. But we'll have like private little tests and public little tests where we're like, hey, we made all of the infected able to jump off the bridge and just swim to a beach. What do you think about this? Does this solve the problem? Do you want this in tandem of them building? Because the problem is that too often, and I talked to Remy and a couple other people about this, and it makes the game boring, is that it comes down to bridges. And it makes the game boring. And it makes the game predictable. So we want to look at avenues when we get back to the Bay Area map that take the emphasis on just destroy a bridge and you're over, GG, quarantine the island and it's over. And that's another reason why we chose Half Moon Bay as our baseline entry, so we can get the non-bridge combat fluid and fun, where people don't feel like they have to have a bridge as a border item to like have a breather to actually be able to enjoy the game. So that's our direction or our vector towards it. And then when we get to that, we'll look at building what you're saying for the infection building for the infected being able to jump off the bridge or go from a beach to another beach. And we'll look at the third option, which is basically potentially adding a tunnel network or a subway. Yeah, because
Yeah,
like you figure we
subway.
do have assets for a subway. It's more so just the technical implementation and adding a navigation layer or something under the map that's subterranean that would allow you to like go through that tunnel network as like a movement area. So it's something that we'll look into and we're going to explore. I've talked to my level designers about all three options, and at this point, yeah, go.
Oh no, I was about to say another option is have like those gorge towers, those
Yeah.
giant infected towers, out, spit out other infected areas across
So
the.
that's what
the
Space
great,
Marine 2
beach.
does as well. Is that you figure that was something else that we were looking at? Is that I was playing, ironically, when I was playing Space Marine 2, that was the one thing that I had for an observation is that what they do is they launch those pods at the, what are they called again? That race, Durvar? The Tyranids will
The
launch
Tyranids.
those pods
Turn.
that basically will land, and then it will have an attack party inside of them, and then they'll spread and populate and like infect the zone or whatever. So that was something else that we were talking about is potentially having a version of a pod or having a structure where basically they could launch it over like a slingshot into your zone, so that way they could have coordinated like invasion attempts, and then your SAM turrets, your Avengers could shoot those down per se. So that's something else that we'll look into. That is actually a fourth technical thing. That's a fourth thing that I haven't mentioned publicly ever, but it is something that I've looked at. I've talked to Durvar and other people in the past about it, where I was like, that would also solve the problem. Well, I'll address that in a month because that's gonna be in October. That's gonna be the following month where it's gonna be something where like at that point that would be October, November at that point where we'd be thinking about putting out the Bay Area map as a playable, even in an early form, and we're gonna have to come up with a solution for that. I personally am favoring the pods being thrown and the building of the walls that they use, because you can transport units around the map. Why can't she? Is the biggest thing, and it's still removing projectiles, so you can still target it and kill it, and you can have defense networks. She just will try and overrun your defense network. What are you gonna say?
I'm about to say, and it works for the carrier too. She can spit them. Those towers can.
That's
spit
true,
at the
because they
carrier
can land
too,
on the
so
deck,
good
and
way
then
of
they
doing
could basically try and scuttle the ship. Because then that way, because on the
Yeah.
carrier we have the rims. Oh God, I forget their. I haven't used the carrier in a while because I've been like in the trenches. But we have the anti-air ones, and then we have the quad cannons, and the anti-air ones were primarily for the birds. That you would buy them, and what we would have is we'd and this is going to be improved a little bit here and there. And the birds returned to search parties, and the idea is that they would find you for the Leviathan, and then the Leviathan would be tasked with a mission to kill you. So the idea in Legacy, which will be expanded upon here with this new faction manager that I'm writing, that has a more central top-down perspective of what I showed earlier in the stream, is that there'd be a kill mission assigned mid-game to Chelsey, which she'd be like, okay, we know they have a carrier, let's go sink it. So then she would task birds to to fly across the map and do circles or squares or whatever to find you. Once she finds you, if she's in a big enough pack or you don't have the anti-air, they would assault you, or they'd retreat, get a Leviathan to come, and then basically get him to assault you. So that's one of the biggest things where it's like going in that direction in terms of like the replayability and like you have the preparation there. But that also is a good idea for like a staging point where they could use those to launch some kind of aerial unit, because we have a lot of biomass in the game for like mold infection. But the only reason why we took out is because at the time the tech didn't allow us to spawn that many static meshes in the world, have them destroyable, and then not destroy your computers. So it's one of the things where like we can reuse some of that to just turn them into like transport pods or other stuff like that. I don't know. I'll have to get with my artists and see what we can get designed. Krieg and Durvar, I think Krieg ran away. Durvar, what's y'all's read on that? Is going more of the Tyranid approach of having some kind of launch pad for infected to like invade your territory.
Hell yeah, I like that
I
idea.
kind of like it. We'd have to make it to where you would clearly know they're about to do it. Like there'd have to be some kind of structure they're building in a zone. And then if you scout them out or keep an eye on them, you would see them constructing it. They would garrison on units inside of them. And then the idea would be is that if you kill them midway, everyone inside just dies. So you figure, I mean, maybe we make it where the juggernaut can fall out and like land if it overland or whatever. But I'm gonna have to come back to that going into because it's not it needed as much for Half Moon Bay. But for Treasure Island, there has to be something to give reason for like you not to just destroy all the bridges, especially just to destroy the Oakland Bay Bridge and just total on Treasure Island for the entire game and give up San Francisco North to the infection. So there has to be some kind of like counter for them to like actually try and invade you and use all of they're gonna plummet, they're gonna just pummel you into the ground if you sit there and you hide on an island all game. What are you gonna say?
I was about to say also, if you had the Leviathan tunnels, which would be pretty decent, what would there be like an option for people to turn off Leviathans or special
Especially
infected?
the same thing we have in custom game options is coming exactly with more mutilators and more settings. So you'll be able to change the Leviathan health. You'll be able to change what game he comes in, what time he comes in, like the day, the hour. You'll be able to change if he's there at all. His melee damage, how many little guys he can spawn, the little guy's health. So
That
you're
would
going to
be
be able to
decent.
change, like that's why I'm saying is the custom game options are going to be coming right after the helicopters because that's Derek's responsibility to kind of go through there. While I'm working on the base pandemic, is that every aspect of the gameplay is going to be moddable from like a mini mod perspective. So if you don't agree with like our health of anything, you can go in and change it. If you don't like certain types of enemies, you can turn them off. So like you can turn off the little guys from Leviathan, and you wouldn't spit them out anymore. Because like that's the only way little guys spawn. Is that he was inspired by Cloverfield and the
Yeah.
Trevor's monsters. So you figure, and some Resident Evil monsters as well. So you figure it's one of those things where it's like there's it'll allow you to configure the experience to how you want it, and that's one of our biggest goals going into September is to just by the end of the month custom game and all of the other stuff that I mentioned in that news post, and then it's in your guys' hand to play it. Give us feedback. Tell us what you like. Tell us what you don't like. There's going to be bugs. There's going to be crashes. There's going to be performance issues. Just keep reporting them to us. We'll filter it. We'll prioritize it, and we'll get it fixed. You know, based off of just everything else going on. Because right now we're on a dedicated sprint to get everything in, and then we'll, fix and whatnot, and then we'll do the next leap, which is vehicles, and we'll fix and whatnot, and then at that point it's 1.4, and we'll deal with that going into 2026. So that's everything in a nutshell. Are there any other questions before we wrap this up? So let me pop Phoenix down. And then what else do we have for questions? So Rifio asks, will we be able to move allied bases wherever we want in their zone? Absolutely. Same thing that it was in Legacy, the same thing that'll be coming over. Is that you were able to click on a civilian encampment, pay money, take a reputational hit, and it would allow you to move them anywhere you wanted in that zone they were already in. Subways is something that we're thinking about, but it's a technical feat that we might be able to solve because the helicopters and the little bird stuff was something that we solved this time around. And it's not that crazy to think about another navigation layer that units would use to get around and having it like under the map. The only problem would be is that we would have to incorporate some kind of like view mode of underground versus top, like when you play like city building game, like not Sims, Parkitect. Or like I can't think of the other game, but yeah. So like you'd have to have some kind of system there for being able to view different verticalities. So it would warrant a design like that. Is the only problem. So in the short term, we might go the direction of the building on the walls, sorry, not the walls, the bridges, and the launching of the pods, and then long term we could push into that. Because one of the biggest things I don't want to add too much. I want to convert what's already there into the rebuild. I want to improve the overall quality and the consistency and the performance, but I don't want to go too deep into the weeds and we're like we're on this for another month or two. We need to get everything that's already planned and in the roadmap and in the experimental merge over, get that situated, fix the issues of the bridging and the other stuff, and then we can look into like major systemic changes like the subways long term. So that way we have an update just built on underground combat. You know, and you have to like go under there and basically clean out the bowels of Treasure Island or San Francisco North because you can clear the up like I don't remember that TV show, but there was a TV show based off of a book that had that where the zombies or the vampires on that thing would hide underground. And you'd have to, and they would come out during the day, kill a couple of random people, convert them, and then go back underground hiding. It was like a horror. It's like a Stephen King novel. I forget its name, but it was one of those things where like those are things that I would say that could be expansions later down the line that are just free ways of playing the game. Where it's like right now we need to focus on the core. We need to focus on getting like the main line items done and not go too way outside of it, like those kind of things, and save that for the future. Like new doctrines, for example, new doctrine trees rather. So let me see. So Dev, on the topic of bridge layers, right now we're planning on making it to where the Golden Gate and the Oakland Bay Bridge only have the top layer because we didn't want to add the top and the bottom because we felt that would be too confusing. So we're making some concessions to how they're designed for an RTS game to just make it easier for them to navigate and move around with taking into consideration like the claustrophobic nature of those bridges. Any other questions? So Phoenix asked one more question about can enemy operators and possible Chelsey control player vehicles, punish people for leaving vehicles? No, right now that's not a thing we're going to be doing. One thing that we did talk about that I was discussing with Derek is that we're going to have to add some kind of method for the operators to be able to get inside of the Little Birds and the VTOLs and the Blackhawks and all that. So one of the things that Derek will be doing going into next week is just adding in the system to facilitate that for like if an operator that's controlled by a player walks up to a vehicle that has a free slot, you can enter that vehicle only in a passenger capacity, and then it'll just change the camera so that if it's a position that you can shoot from, it will allow you to shoot from that location. If it's a position that's only a passenger that is non-combative, like the back of like a Chinook, then it'll just change the camera to a prefixed camera location, and then it'll just allow you to get in and out, and then you can parachute out from that location. So it's something else that we'll do. So then that way, people that are playing as operators can jump out of a Chinook or a Little Bird or a Black Hawk whenever they want, and they'll be able to freely enter and leave vehicles based off of if they're landed, they can get out, and if they're landed, they can get in. I don't know about the rappelling right off the rip for the operators. I got to talk to Derek about that because we don't want to put the Little Birds in and then the operators have no interaction with them for players playing as them. That might be a point of contention there where we might have to invest a little bit extra time that we're accounting for next week to situate that. That's pretty much everything I have for questions. Let's see if there's YouTube. Oh, that guy pretty much just clarified what I was already saying what people do. So we'll give it another minute or two for any questions, and then we're going to wrap it up at that point. Let me see if there's anything else. Let me check my notes. Oh, I do want to mention that there were a couple of behind the scenes changes to we fixed that weird sound bug with the M249 last Sunday. And then there were some localization issues that were fixed for Chinese, Spanish, I think it was French, but they weren't loading properly. So those issues are fixed. If we run into translation issues, please report them on our forum that we have on Discord. So that way I can update that and send it to the person that does the translation so we can get that rectified. There were some changes to how we do the packaging and updating for the game to reduce the update size down to a minimum of 200 to 300 megabytes for just simple updates and patches. Like if a lot of files are changed, then you're just going to have to update and change all of those. But what we noticed is that even if we changed a file that was a couple kilobytes or megabyte, you'd get a 1.5 gigabyte update. So we reorganized and resorted some things last Sunday going into Monday-ish to basically make it to where the patching system with Steam works more natively. The way your patches should be substantially smaller for everything, unless we just really did change that much. And in those cases, you're just fucked. You have to just get the full patch. I think that's pretty much it. Let me ask my other questions. So there's a couple more questions, and we're going to wrap this up. So basically, Phoenix asked the question I already answered. When it comes to the helicopters, will operators be able to sit on the passenger seats or sit on the sides? Yes, it's something we're working on next week. Will the infection be attached to the building just for appearance? The infection will only be tied to just their physical presence in the zone, the zones and the buildings that they affect in that zone. Will there be placeable mines possible for the operators? No, for the time being. Well, that's something we're going to look into long term for having an auto mine deployment vehicle going into phase 3. We don't want to go back to individual mines unless we add it to the sniper for a claymore is what we'd want to potentially do long term. But that's being saved for doctrines. We were planning on adding more abilities to all the ground infantry going into the doctrines card and adding a little bit more like replayability and like role oriented abilities to each one. So that's something that we're going to look into going into phase 3, just to just flesh them out a little bit more and give the sniper a claymore, give the spec ops C4 something they can blow up like on demand, like the Company of Heroes demolitions experts upgrade. Another question is asked: if you add in the CERC HQ, can you place 2 at one time? If one gets destroyed, it gets destroyed permanently. If no one's going to ask, then I will. No, only one. Tom asked me, I have a question. Are we going to be able to see infected Chelsey since it's still on the roadmap as to be? Are we still going to be playing as? So right now, that is more of a wish list. Is playing as the infected. I don't have an ETA or a timeline on that. For the time being, that's just going to be kept as something that's like we want to do long term, but we have no idea when we can accomplish it. My primary goal is just getting everything at 1.3 situated, and then getting to 1.4 for the campaign and everything else post. But what you're suggesting is a good idea, and it's something I want to do long term. Okay, so thank you guys so much for coming. We appreciate you guys coming down, sitting down, and discussing the progress of the game. If you want to consider supporting development further, consider buying one of our support packs on Steam. Check out our Patreon, our Discord pledge system. They all help. You know, they help just kind of fill in the gap here and there and whatnot. And we thank you guys for your patience as we work through the rebuild. And keep your eyes on the next CERC HQ in terms of basically our goal is going to be to get something playable to you guys by next Saturday. So we'll see how that goes. There might be a delay. We'll see. But you'll know by Friday night, I would say. If not, if it gets delayed, we'll let you know if it does get delayed on the Saturday HQ, because we're going to try and move hell or high water to get something playable by next week that you guys can play. Just keep in mind, the save system probably won't be in. So you'll have to wait till the next week to be able to save your games, but it'll be something early you can play, you can get your hands on, you can play co-op, and you can get some early feedback in while we work on the other systems. Anyhow, thank you guys.